for November, what is today? 4th, WSSAAA Wednesday. Really excited to see everybody today. I woke up on Sunday and it was November, and it kind of weirded me out that we haven't had any volleyball games or football games or cross country races still. And so this time, honestly, was in a little bit of a funk to start the week, just based on that and some other things. But man, I think we're all kind of chomping at the bit for anything. And so being able to get together, Dave Ticker was talking earlier, there's a lot of power in our connections. Encourage you to connect any way you possibly can with your colleagues so that we can kind of have some sense of normalcy. But this WSSAAA Wednesday opportunity is definitely one of those times. So we got a great slate ahead of us today. We have Lisa Langston, who's going to chat with us for a little bit, and then a report from the WIAA, and then a mentoring update from Jeff Lowell to talk a little bit about the WSSAAA Wednesday extension format we'll be moving forward with. So what I'd like to do right now is introduce Scott Norty, former AD at Lakes High School, to introduce our speaker today, Lisa Langston. Scott, take it away, my man.
Thanks, Cole. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Scott.
Okay. I had the privilege of serving with Lisa on the NIAAA board. She was elected in 1987. Lisa's a 1997, excuse me, or 2017. Lisa's a 1986 graduate of Texas A&M University, where she was a guard on the women's basketball team. After graduation, Lisa continued her basketball career professionally in Europe from 87 to 90, where she was ranked as the league's top scorer. Lisa began her career in education with the Fort Worth Independent School District as a classroom teacher and coach in 1990. In 95, Lisa began her administrative journey when she accepted the position of coordinator for middle school sports and has continued to serve the Fort Worth ISD in a leadership capacity ever since. Lisa was the assistant athletic director, director of athletics from 2000 to 2006, and is currently the director of athletics, where she oversees 16 high schools and 21 middle schools in the 5th largest school district in the state of Texas. She is currently the president-elect of the NIAAA board and will begin her term as president at the conclusion of the conference in December. Please welcome Lisa Langston. Lisa, are you here?
Yes, I am. Good morning, everyone. How are y'all? I'm going to try to share my screen here. Let's see. And we'll get started.
Go ahead, Ian.
All right, there we go. All right, there we go. Hey, well, first of all, thank you guys for having me. When Dave reached out to me, one of the things I thought about was I was a little familiar with Washington State because I looked through my dissertation and I actually used some information from the WIAA in my dissertation because I was already looking at some of the things you guys were doing for your coaches' education. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you, and I'm kind of familiar with your state. I have a good friend that lives in Kirkland, so I come up to visit for a while there. When she first moved up, I think for 9 straight years, I would come up, and I brought the Texas sun with me, and I always had a great time up there. So let me just start about what I hope to accomplish today is kind of to inspire you to get you ready for what's coming your direction as far as when you're able to have sports again, share some of the things that we're going through. At the end, there'll be opportunities to ask me any kind of questions you might have about what we're going through right now. And then also I'll talk a little bit about the NIAAA virtual conference. But to start off in Texas, we, large state, and if you look over to the left side of the state, all the population is small over here. And in this area, the number of COVID cases was pretty low. And so what the state UIL, that's our governing body, what they did was so that we could get sports going. And we actually had summer strength and conditioning sports specific training that started back in June. So we've been on the campus with kids for a long time. But what they realized was they didn't want to hold up those small schools from starting their sports, because the metroplex and large areas were the ones that had the more COVID cases. So consequently, what they did was they had an August 3rd start for the class 1A through 4A, and then a September for the big school. The problem in Fort Worth is we have schools in both categories. So we have 4A, we have 7 4A schools and 7 5A and 1 6A, and I'll probably miscount because we have a young men's and a young women's leadership. So sometimes they get counted as one when we're looking at scheduling, but they operate independently. So that's kind of what we started with in Texas as far as fall sports, and our fall sports of volleyball, football, team tennis, and cross country. So what's happening in Fort Worth? We are doing in-person and virtual instruction. We started virtual school on September the 8th. And then October the 16th is when everybody came back for in person that wanted to. And what they did with the high schools to try to maintain that social distance is they put our kids in cohorts, Monday, Tuesday group, Wednesday, Thursday group, and then they meet every other Friday. And the principals, we have athletic periods. And so what the principals really tried to do was make sure that the athletes were in the same cohorts so that they could actually have their athletic periods and a coach could get some good work done. We started out volleyball for our 4A, unfortunately just ended this past week. Our teams unfortunately got swept in the playoffs, but the one good thing about it was we went through that 4A volleyball without any COVID disruptions. And I can tell you those, depending on what's going on, I forgot to put in the slide presentation what's going on in Fort Worth right now as far as the positivity rate, the hospitalization and death rates, because they're all going up right now. And so that falls into that last statement about anticipate disruption. In fact, I got a phone call this morning from one of my head football coaches who has a positive in his staff and a close contact. And so we're looking at how that's going to impact the team going forward in the next couple of games. But when I start thinking about what prepared me to deal with what we're going through with this pandemic, I have to go back to, and Scott mentioned I played basketball professionally, and I played in Germany back when it was West Germany. And this is a picture of our team. And Wolfgang over here on the left was supposed to pick me up at the airport in Frankfurt, and he wasn't there. And so right away, my time in Germany, I'm already having a little anxiety because the person supposed to pick me up is not at the airport. And, you know, for you young people, this is before cell phones and things like that. So all I got was a letter with a picture of him in it and said, okay, this is the guy that's going to pick you up from the airport in Frankfurt. And so he wasn't there. But during my time, I had to make a lot of adjustments. I'm going into a new culture. I don't know the language. I didn't even know how they shopped. I went to the grocery store the first time, took my team duffel bag, and I filled it with food like I would be shopping in the States. And then I could barely walk to my apartment with the bag. And when I got there, all of my yogurt packets had burst and things like that. So right away, I had to learn how I had to change my focus. Practice was different. Being a college athlete, this was before the NCAA had the rules, the 20-hour rule. So we practiced all the time. I was accustomed to that. Germany, the facilities were limited. So we only practiced 3 times a week and played games once a week. And some of those practice, they let the partition down in the gym and we just had the 2 baskets and that's it. And so it was just a lot of things that I had to adjust to. And one of the things in that process of adjusting was I couldn't do it on my own. I mean, like I had to go and find out, take care of the paperwork to be able to stay in the country longer than 6 months. So I had to depend on a teammate, and I was pretty independent. So this was a bit of a challenge for me. And I tell you all this because the one thing that I learned was I learned how to adapt. And this picture right here, this is after a tournament in Luxembourg, and this is from my photo album, and you can't really see that, but it says, "Wow, look at that ankle." Well, I sprained my ankle in the tournament, and in the States we get bags of ice, and then you ice a sprained ankle. They didn't have ice in Luxembourg. They gave me a chunk of ice, and as we were driving back to Germany, I had that piece of ice, and I was just rubbing it over my ankle, and so I realized, man, I'm not in Kansas anymore. And, and like I said, things was really, really different. And so when I think about it, what skill did I develop in Germany? I definitely learned how to adapt. The quality of being able to adjust to new conditions. And the pictures on the screen right now, this is from my office. This is where I am now. In the middle, this is where our two administrative assistants sit, and they came in and put that plexiglass, that box right there. That the first time through, they didn't put the plexiglass all the way to the end. They just put it, and they stopped. So we called them back and said, "Hey, we need it to go all the way." So that's where our two administrative assistants sit. This picture over here on the left, this is when our when our stadium workers come for football games. This is the QR code up here on the wall that they have to click on to pre-screen for the game. And, those are our supplies. You got hand sanitizer, mask, and wipes and things like that. And we're doing a clear bag. So we got Ziploc bags for people. And this is inside our office. That's our conference room here. This is, and so if we have to pre-screen, if you forget to pre-screen before you get to work, we got a thermometer there so that you can check in. And so, like I said, from my time in Germany, I've learned adaptability, and how it relates to COVID is I had to change my thought process. And you guys, once you bring back sports and you have kids on your campus, just know that sports will look different, and it will be different. There will be COVID disruption. My colleague that's in charge of football, he just made the comment Monday morning when he came in. He said, "Man, after football, I'm going to need a vacation because this ABC, I think we might be on version T of the football plan, because every Monday is different." And just like I said, the football coach that called this morning, that's going to affect our schedule at the end of this week and next week. But force yourself to take risks. I took a risk getting on that plane flying to Germany, and it worked out for me. We're taking a risk playing sports in a pandemic, but what we're doing to try to minimize those risks is making sure we have mitigation plans and protocols in place. And just know, for us, what we did with our mitigation plans was with 16 high schools and 21 middle schools, we can't have one plan fits all. So what we got put together was the basic guidelines for our plan. And then each campus had to look at the number of participation. They had to look at their facilities and develop a plan that would work for them. And then be ready to adjust, because you put it on paper, and then when you try to implement it, it doesn't always go to plan. And the other thing is, we encourage others to be open-minded. As an athletic director, I know what I do. I'm modeling for our coaches and for our students. So one of the things that I had to do personally was, I start going indoors to my YMCA to work out, because how can I tell parents that your kids should play sports when I'm afraid to work out indoors on my own? And so I looked at that. The other thing was, we're not in this, like I said, we're not in this by ourselves. Who or what department can help you? I can tell you in Fort Worth, our PPE it comes through our operations department, and they have been fantastic to work with as far as, we send them the requests. They have a Google Doc where our coordinators at the campus can put in what they need, and, and they have it delivered to the campus. Our health service department, they answer all things COVID because, we're not health specialists. And so we need to turn to the people that really have the knowledge and utilize them. And so when we think about what this adaptability, I try to look for what the positives are. What can I gain out of it, and what can we gain out of it? And then how good has been adaptable? This is a picture from 2015 when I went back for my third visit with my German teammates from the first team that I played on. We were there to celebrate someone's 50th birthday, and I had a fabulous time. And I can tell you, not everyone that goes overseas and plays in a foreign league have the experience that I did. And I think when I talk to my teammates, I know the reason why is because sometimes I like to say that I became a good little German. I mean, I still eat a pizza with a knife and a fork. But that's what it's going to take to be successful maneuvering COVID is being adaptable and knowing that things are going to be new and challenging, and be up for the challenge. When you're adaptable, I mean, things don't faze you. I have a tagline on my email that says, "Blessed is the flexible, for they will not be bent out of shape." And, I have to keep that in mind when things pop up like that phone call I got this morning. And like I said, I played for two different teams. And so the second year, I played for a team in Oberhausen. And here's Oberhausen. And I have friends, I made friends with some players in Dusseldorf. One of them being Dennis Rodman's sister played for Dusseldorf. They were like the #1 team in the country. They had all the money and all that. And consequently, they lived in nice apartments and they had cable. And so a lot of times I would go down and visit, and the second year I got in a little car in my contract. And so sometime I would drive, but their apartment was on a busy street, and sometimes it would be a challenge to park. So often I would ride the train. So one night one day I rode the train, and I guess I stayed a little late. And, my German at the time, I could understand quite a bit, couldn't speak it very well at all. But I misread the train schedule. And I noticed that the train that I was on was not going to stop in Oberhausen. It was going to go over to Essen. So when I got to Duisburg, I had to make a decision. What am I going to do? And I made the decision based on the information I had. The information I had was at the Duisburg Zoo, there was always taxis in front of it. So I made the decision to get off the train in Duisburg, walk up to the zoo, and then take a taxi to Oberhausen. Well, God, man, being in your early 20s, you don't always think things through. Now, the zoo wasn't open after 11. So consequently, there was no taxis there. So when I got up to where the zoo was, I saw the sign that said Mulheim. And I knew that Mulheim was close to Oberhausen. And I just took off walking. And as I was walking, there was spots on the trip where it was just pitch black, like I couldn't even see my shoes. I don't even remember a car ever passing me on the road. I had my Walkman, so, kind of like you guys before the meeting started, you had your music. And so I was singing, and I was, just making my way to Mulheim. And then my batteries ran out of my Walkman. And you young people might need to Google what a Walkman is, a Sony Walkman. So now it's just me in silence, and I'm walking in silence. And finally I get to Mulheim, and I see a familiar road, and I hook a left, and then I start walking to my apartment. And I don't know, I walked over 2+ hours in the middle of the night, and I finally got home. I can't say when I got to my block, I finally saw a taxi when I didn't need it. And one thing about this story, my mother doesn't know about this. I've never told her because I just fill her with angst. But when I think about that story, I think about the resilience, to be able to recover quickly from difficulties. I was facing some difficulties because that night, remember, there's no cell phones. And it just reminds me of the times that we're going through right now with COVID and having to be resilient. Because we are dealing with unknown. It was just like being on that road and not knowing where it's going to go. And yeah, I was telling someone yesterday, what we're doing sports right now is not for the faint at heart. And just like I had faith that night that I would eventually make it to my apartment, it's the same way I feel about the way that we're doing sports right now. Just knowing that we're walking into something that's unknown, but we know how to administrate sports. We know how to do that type of administration. It's just that there's going to be some plots and turns and things like that we're not familiar with. And so when I think about that, is what we're dealing with is see yourself on the other side. And I think our job as administrators is to help people see that other side as well. It's like the coach I talked to this morning. It's going to be okay. We got protocols in place. That's one thing. We might not know who's going to get COVID, but we know we got places, things, and plans and protocols in place to address what comes up and things like that. Reflect and learn. What I realized that night was details matter, and it matters with COVID. Making sure that you're practicing in pods, that people are keeping their social distance to minimize that spread within a program. It's important. For me that night was I needed to read the train schedule. If I read the train schedule and paid attention to what I was looking at, I would have seen that train wasn't going to stop in Oberhausen. And then knowing that our coaches and athletes draw their strength from us and their through our confidence and our conviction. I mean, that night when I stepped off of that train, I had made a commitment. I was a conviction that, hey, I can't get home if I do this. And I'll be honest with you all is, there was times when we first started. When we first brought sports back, I had to question, is this the right thing to do? And once we started, that's when I was like, okay, we're in this, we are going to be committed. And, one of the things that, I say is, consistent communication. We're constantly in talks. We brought in our coordinators via Zoom, and we had meetings and we talked things through, we shared, it's because we're all in this together, and like I said, we don't have all the answers, and I never forget that our coordinators are on the campus going through this, and so we definitely got to communicate with them and get their thoughts, because they're the ones that in the trenches. They are along with our coaches and our kids, and so I can't sit in the office and not include them in the decision making and things like that. But again, when I think about that night when I was walking in the dark, I think about that street sign that I saw that said Mulheim, and I don't even remember how many kilometers. But for our coaches and our student athletes, we are that street sign. We are the ones that's going to give that guidance. We might not be walking with them the day to day when they're on their campus. And I know some you all are athletic administrators at your campus, so you have the luxury of being there with your people and you can see them, and that makes it a lot easier, I believe, or I'm not going to say easy, but it's more it's more of a comfort to have that person right there on the campus with you, where you can go and talk to them, as opposed to having, to go by phone like we are and things like that. But again, like I said, the athletic director, we're that sign, we're the Mulheim sign. And so that second year, this is just some pictures from the Oberhausen team that I was playing for. And you can see no social distancing there back in the day. And you can see how small the gym was and things like that. But that second year, in April, we were at practice and I was getting really winded. I don't know what was going on. I couldn't catch my breath. I was having some kind of issues. And so I told the team about it. And so they sent me to a doctor, and then the doctor sent me to a cardiologist. And And then, so I went to the cardiologist and he did an EKG, I did a stress test, and he said, I can't, there's something abnormal about your EKG, but since I don't have your baseline, kind of like with how we do concussion, I can't tell you what it is. And so Dr. Lang was his name. And so when I left this office, before I left this office, all he said to me was, there's something wrong with your heart. And that was all he said. And so I go and I get in my little Volkswagen Derby, little yellow car, and I'm driving back to my apartment, and I'm in tears because I don't know if I'm going to have a heart attack or what, because, I really didn't know what was going on. And so when I got back to my apartment and I'd start thinking, I can't call my mother because I just don't think that she can handle this. And so I called my college coach. And I called her because I remember, as a player at Texas A&M, she was my coach my junior and my senior year. I knew that she had seen me at my best, but more important, she had seen me when I was injured and when I was broken. And that's kind of how I felt at that time. And so I called her because I needed somebody in the States to know what was going on. And I tell you that story, and I share that with you because I know as we're doing athletics during this time of COVID, that you're going to be, and we coach coaches as athletic administrators, we coach coaches. And I know that we are going to be that coach that Lynn Hickey was for me. And I know some of you might know Lynn Hickey. I know she's the athletic director at Eastern Washington University. She was my college basketball coach my junior and senior year. And so I called her to let her know what was going on, to comfort me. And how I thought about this was a couple of weeks ago, I had one of my coaches call, and she felt like she had a student that was positive on her team, but the student wasn't sharing it with anyone. And as the coach was talking, I could literally hear her knees knocking. She was just full of anxiety and angst. And I just had to tell her, Coach, take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. Take a deep breath. And, so I had that incident with her. Then I had an athletic trainer that called. They had a young man who had tested positive, and on his 14th, after his 14-day quarantine, he came back to campus, and it happened to be the football game day, and the coach wanted to play him in that game, and the trainer didn't feel like that was appropriate. And so I said, Sarah, do you feel good about the decision? And your counterpart, Bill, two trainers there, do you both feel good about the decision? And she's like, yes, ma'am, I think it's the right thing to do. And I said, well, okay, then good. And so, I go back to work, and then less than an hour later, she calls me again. And I said, and she kind of rehashed the whole thing with me again. And I said, Sarah, making this decision, will you be able to go home and get a good night's sleep based on the decision that you made? And she's like, yes. And I said, so, okay. Well, I said, I support you. And so know that that's what you might face as an athletic director, is being that comforter, and like I said, the title of this slide, Lead with Compassion. Because the adults, we're here for the kids, but the coaches will need someone to lean up against it, and that might be you. And when I was reading John Maxwell's leadership book, one of the three questions he said that followers ask their leaders, do you care for me? Can I trust you? And can you help me? And that really resonated with how I felt about Coach Hickey in my dark moment. And ultimately what it was, and what makes that story resonate with me now is because I had a virus, and the virus had reached the membrane around my heart. And it could have been serious. But anyway, so like I said, I just wanted to share that with you because, I know that some of you might start bringing kids and your coaches to the campus and start working with kids. So just know that you might have to do some propping up of people. And so, the thing that I know for sure as I'm sitting here, is as an athletic administrator, your coaches and your student athletes, they need you. They will need you. You know, I look back on my experience in Germany, and I saw that's where I developed my adaptability and my resilience skills. And I know if you sit back and reflect on your life and your experiences, you're gonna find that those moments, so those experiences where you developed those. I mean, adaptability. You know, just think about it. When you left home to go to university, how different was that? And resiliency. I mean, if you're an athlete, a former athlete, you've dealt with being resilient because, you know, we get placed in adverse situations all the time as an athlete. And so my point is, these are skills that you already possess. And so you're ready. So once the state of Washington opens up and they allow you to have student athletes and coaches working with kids, you'll be prepared. But like I said, I just want to share some of the things that we are going through. And, you know, the last thing with John Maxwell on leadership, you know, the law of the lid, you know, making sure your leadership is effective. And one of the ways you can grow yourself and make sure you're prepared is to make sure you attend the NIAAA virtual conference. You know, I'm saddened that we are not going to be face to face. Number one, because our president Lannis Robinson is from Tampa, and it was going to be the first time that the president actually got to preside over a conference in their hometown. So I'm sad for him. But the NIAAA, they're making a great effort to make this still a very positive learning experience. And I think as long as we've been dealing with COVID, that we have learned that we've adapted to virtual, just like you guys in this group. I mean, what a awesome way to get support and to grow yourself with these WSSAAA Wednesdays. I think it's a fabulous idea. We might be stealing it. I don't know what I don't know how we won't get it to rhyme so nicely. But you know, there's network opportunities with the conference. The platform that they're using, I'm not familiar with it, but from what I've gathered is there's going to be breakout opportunities where you can actually engage people. You know, we'll have facilitators for the talking and trade and give and take, just as though we were in person. And if you go to the NIAAA website, you can find the topics for the talking and trading. I know one of them is diversity. That's been a hot topic this year for obvious reasons. And I can tell you that the NIAAA back in the board back in February, we within the board members, we had a subcommittee on diversity. And Mike McCurk out of Missouri has done a fabulous job of leading the effort. And we put together a series of meetings from March all the way until just recently. And what came out of that was a ad hoc DEI committee, diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. And you know, so they're doing great work and things like that. So I like the fact that the NIAAA, we were ahead of the game as far as looking at social injustice and looking at our underserved membership, potential members. And that was a part of our strategic plan, this 5th strategic plan. So that was in there. And one thing about the conference being virtual, you know, some of you may have wanted to take LTI courses, but there's not an instructor in your state maybe for the course that you wanted to take. Well, all the courses will be offered, and by being virtual, here's a great opportunity. You know, the registration is reduced, obviously, because, you know, no luncheon, no banquet, and things like that. But you're still getting a conference gift. And those of you who've gone to the conference before, you know, Dr. Green will still be speaking on giving his law year in review, and that's always quite entertaining. We'll have the delegate assembly. You know, we have a running for, I cannot remember what regions they are, or at large, but we have an at-large election, so that election will still take place. And, you know, we'll have opening and closing speakers. Tony Dungy, always inspirational. And Derek Brooks, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to hear him speak, but he has a great story and message to share as well. And I think that's kind of it for me. And so at this time, if you guys have any questions, I'll be willing to answer whatever you might have.
Lisa, I'd like to ask about your season so far. You briefly touched on how COVID has impacted your program, but if you could talk about your fall sports teams and each one of the pivots that you've had to make based on COVID cases or emergent situations, would that be, I think, extremely helpful for us?
Okay, and I had the slide in here and I took it out last night. Like I said, with the 4A volleyball, we were able to go without any varsity, without any stoppage. We had one little JV situation where they were quarantined and missed a game. 5A volleyball and 6A volleyball. Currently, we have two programs that are in quarantine. One team, our 6A team, the girls were at some event and it turned out to be a super spreader, and 5 of the varsity players are out. The other 5A high school, we had students, girls that were on the volleyball and the basketball team. So right now the volleyball team and basketball, which started practice 2 weeks, girls started 2 weeks ago and boys started last week. So that volleyball program is in quarantine, and so is the girls basketball team right now. So that's volleyball. Team tennis, we didn't have any issues at all. No stoppage or anything like that. Cross country looked very different because UIL gave us rules where you can only have 8 schools at a meet, and you could only have like 1 level. So the varsity girls and boys, and then they had to clear the site, and then you could bring in the JV and run them. And we just had our district cross country meet this past Friday, and we have 2 almost self-contained districts. Our 4A are all together, all Fort Worth schools, and then our 5A, we have 1 outside school in that district. And the meet went well. Our department, we invested in chip timing, and that worked phenomenally. And we had no issues with that. But the cross country season itself really looked different. People were canceling meets left and right because really, you're going to lose money trying to have a meet at a park where you're paying for the park and things like that. And only being limited to 8 teams. And then football. Oh, football. We've had stoppage at the 4 and 5A level. We've had to cancel a game the day of, like within 3 hours of the game. And I believe that game that was canceled, one I'm thinking about, was the opponent, not our school. But we have a 4A football team that is in quarantine because they had 17 players that had close contact. And so this is the last week of 4A football regular season. So they missed last week and this week. So, their season has ended. A Sunday when I was sitting at home and I was working on my presentation a little, I got a phone call from my head football coach at my 6A high school. He's quarantined. And thankfully, it's not impacting his team. And, and I was talking about being adaptable. And, he has a OC and DC that are ready to step up. And they're going to coach the game this Friday night without the head coach. And so, that's just know for a while there, the Dallas Morning newspaper was writing articles about COVID disruptions. And I think now it's just, that it's coming. We will see how it will impact the football playoffs. And because like right now we have a team that might be on a 5-day rotation, playing football games every 5 days, which is the minimum. And that's because they've lost games. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. What do you wish you had known or had done from the start of this based on what you know now?
I'm not certain we would have done anything different. The thing that what I've tried to do is show myself some grace and make sure that my coaches, that I show them grace, and then that they show themselves grace. Like I said, it looks different. And, like one of my girls basketball coach, she's like, Coach, I don't have enough kids to have a freshman team this year. And this is something we did not see coming. Because the students have the option of doing in-person or virtual, and because of what's happening with the economy for some of the kids' families, we have students that are not being successful in virtual schooling because they're going to work. No one saw that coming. I would have never thought that. And we're concerned about our students. One good thing that we did back in May, I attended a workshop with the Nashville Coaching Coalition, and they had a speaker, Molly Grisham, on there, and she had this emotional map. And so I shared that with my coordinators. They shared it with their coaches, and basically it's a way to check in with your student athletes. And so our coaches have continued to check in with their athletes. Like the girls basketball coach, who was the one that was talking about not having a freshman team, every morning at 9 o'clock, she has a check in with her students. We have in the past, we've had our coaches do home visits. And so our coaches, they have a sense of what our students are going home to. And so they understand that they need to check in with them and make sure that they, one thing we know, no one's okay. No, none of us are okay, because none of this is normal for us. But as an athletic administrator, it's my job to be as strong and solid for our people. And I show whatever I might have, whatever angst I might have. It never shows up when I come to work. And but really, I mean, to answer your question, I can't think of anything really that we would have done differently. We had a plan, and I know people in other districts that did not have plans and things like that. So just having that foresight to put things on paper and then being flexible to adjust them when they don't work.
Absolutely. Got a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
One wondering how you guys handled ticketing to your contest this fall.
Okay. Well, that's a great question. Right now we're only charging for our varsity football games, and we're doing online with hometown ticketing. And we've used online ticketing before, but we probably will. If it was left up to me, we would never go back to taking money ever again, because the ease of it. It's just been tremendous. They go online, and the company has been super to work with. But for our volleyball, we have really small gyms. I showed you that picture of the gym in Germany. Our high school gyms and a lot of our campuses, we only have seating on one side. So initially, we started off with no spectators. And that's the same thing with basketball. We're starting off with no spectators. And we did this strategically. Number one was we just wanted our coaches to really concentrate on coaching the game and not having to be concerned about if somebody came into the gym with a mask on or not. And then we phased it in, even with our football scrimmages, we phased it in where a student athlete could have 2 people, and we just had a list of who was coming to the game for them. And that's kind of how we handled it. We have 2 central sites for basketball, and just looking at the numbers, one of our facilities is 4,500 capacity, but when they went in and they marked it for social distancing, the capacity went down to 1,100. And so I'm trying to rotate as many of our basketball teams through that facility as possible, so that we will be able to have more parents come to the games. And we have no students at our football games unless they are at the varsity game, unless they're with a parent. And that was just to assist us with the social distancing.
Another question in the chat is, was it a requirement of participation for a student to be taking place in-person learning in order to participate in sports?
No, but I do know some districts that are like that. But what happens with our students that are virtual, like I said, we have athletic periods built into our school days. Those students cannot come for the during the school hour athletic periods, but they definitely can participate after school. In fact, my colleague has students in our district, and his children are doing virtual, but one is playing basketball, and so he's only getting that practice after school.
Well, I don't see any other questions, but if you might be willing to stick around for a couple of minutes to
Sure.
To just peruse the chat room and answer any questions that pop up there. We really appreciate you joining us this morning, and among all the stuff that's going on, just can't thank you enough for being with us.
Oh, you're welcome. And I saw the question about the return to play policy for COVID. We have I know the state of, oh gosh, I looked this up and now I just drew a blank. Arizona and Missouri, they have a return to play COVID policy for the state. We have one for our district that we're just fine tuning, and it's on an individual basis, because if someone has mild symptoms or they're asymptomatic, we might not take them through that progression. But it's a 7-day document, and it's something that I can share. I can get it to Dave and email it to him if you'd like to see it. But it mirrors some of the things that I found on the Arizona and the Missouri website. Yeah. Oh, and in our state, WIAA, they require a student who has tested positive for COVID to get a physician's clearing. And that has been interesting, because what does that mean? You know, is that a negative test? No, it's not. You actually got to go to a physician. And so what that, in a district like ours, that can cause some financial hardship for a student to have to go to a doctor to get clearance when they don't need that clearance to come back to school. All they need to do is meet that quarantine deadline or guideline. So. Well, thank you guys for the opportunity to be here. Like I said, I love the state of Washington. I can't wait to come back up to Kirkland or to Seattle and go down and get some oysters down there on the, what is it? On the waterfront. Yeah. Yes. And Leavenworth, because it's Sprechen and this indoor. So, yes, I've been there. Love that place. So thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. All right, BJ, Mick, you guys are up. JK, Andy Barnes.
Awesome, thank you,
Cindy,
Cole.
sorry, Cindy Absent too. Cindy, I forgot
you. Don't forget anybody on the team here. That was outstanding. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thanks for Dave Ticker for bringing her to our team. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen. As you guys probably know, we've been doing some work at the office, and we wanted to make sure we share with you some information and give you an opportunity to ask questions, whatever we can do to support, obviously, the work that you guys are doing. So I'm going to start by inviting your board president, Mr. Tim Thompson, to kind of just talk you through some of the steps that we've been taking the last couple of weeks.
Great, thank you, BJ. I'd like to, first of all, thank all of you for, participating in the survey that came out last week. Your input was just really fantastic and really provided a lot of great guidance for staff and the board to go ahead and move forward with kind of our first step, we believe, in coming back to participation. Of course, we had the questions that we asked you to consider 2 weeks ago at WSSAAA Wednesday. You did a great job of that. I got a chance to even get on with District 7 board, as well as several leagues in my area. We got a lot of input, but then from that input, we crafted the survey, and staff worked really hard on that to be very specific with what we were looking for. And we got the survey results, and from there, staff did a great job of creating a recommendation for the board to consider in regards to the process of approaching a WIAA planned season, and how are we going to make decisions looking across the state at the various 38, 39 counties and where everybody sits. So had a great recommendation. Staff worked very hard on that. The board adopted the recommendation for the process. And so now this next step is really, hey, what plan should we have for our seasons? We have our current plan. We know that basketball and wrestling are high-risk sports. We also know, in looking at the data from across the state, there's only about 3% of our schools right now that could actually host a basketball game or a wrestling match that are actually in a county that's below 25. And that's based on Monday's data, which could have changed since then. So we really want to take a look again at making sure that we have a plan that makes sense. And so that's kind of the next piece for the board to consider is, you know, what is our plan? Should we stick with the current plan, apply our process, move sports if they don't meet the thresholds and the criteria, or should we look at another plan that maybe is a better fit? And of course, we're going to want your input. And again, you guys really did a fantastic job of getting that input to us. And we're going to ask you again to help us out. By the way, one real quick shout out to Scott Nordy. Great to see you, Scott. Your timing for retirement was impeccable. We're hoping that you're having a great year. Certainly come back and give us some advice anytime you want. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to BJ and let her go through the slides and the details of what we're looking for and the process that we came up with. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. And really, any of our staff members, feel free to jump in at any time. So just a handful of slides to go through today, just to kind of give you the background a little bit on the proposal that went in front of the board that they approved and sort of next steps. So as you know, that survey went out October 26th. We had 236 athletic directors to respond, and also offered kind of the opportunity for additional feedback if anybody wanted to offer that. So we wanted to make sure we got as much information as possible to be able to provide the board to help them make decisions. What came out of that was we kind of had 4 bullet points that came out of the survey that we felt were really going to be vital to help the board create a process to address the next steps. As you guys know, this is a pretty challenging time and it's sort of a moving target. We wanted to kind of focus on process rather than diving into just what are the sports going to look like and culminating events. So that was sort of the goal here. As you can see, one of the bullet points was that the executive board will kind of lean on region alignments to be making determinations on sport seasons. Secondly, the minimum percentage to be eligible to commence a sport, we decided to land on 50% within the region. And that was really based on information that came out of that survey. Thirdly, the results of the survey showed that as ADs, you had a window between 2 and 4 weeks where you felt it was important that decisions are being made. We were honestly a little bit surprised at the 2 weeks. I thought that was a little quick, but we also understand the recognition of this moving target. So that was came out of the survey as well. And the 4th bullet point was that once a season began, that it would continue through the end. We wouldn't stop, delay, restart, those kind of things. So those were the 4 bullet points that we felt came out of the survey to help develop a good process. So when the board met, it was decided that the metrics that would be used in making these determinations would be using the Washington State assessment dashboard rather than local counties. We know that there's a lot of different information out there, and to be consistent, We're going to use the Washington State assessment. And when we make reference to weeks, the determinations will be made on Fridays of those weeks. So you have that information on Friday afternoon. Secondly, WIAA staff is going to be making a statewide database or maybe a dashboard that will provide all that information by county for us to utilize in making those determinations. So the information that you received via email yesterday really laid out the fact that our intent is to go forward with 4 weeks prior to a scheduled season. The preliminary update will go out via that dashboard, providing the information about percent of eligible schools per region, per classification, and per risk. And that just kind of is the preliminary to give you a heads up of what we think might be coming down the road. At the 3-week mark, the same information will come out, and at that point, a decision will be made whether or not a sport will move forward or whether or not we need to adjust that particular sport based on the 50% number. At this point, it will go into a regional format where district directors will work with their member schools and leagues to determine if they're going to be part of the season as scheduled. Obviously, assuming that a few sports would go on, or all of them, or whatever that is, at that point, district directors will work with you guys regionally to make a decision. Are you going to participate in that scheduled season, or does the region want to adjust that season? At that point, then obviously we would go forward at the 2-week mark. People should know if they are participating or not participating and what that's going to look like. So I kind of put the season 1 on a calendar for you here. Friday, November 27th is the day that we're shooting for the preliminary update. Friday, December 4th is the secondary update when the decision will be made whether we go forward or reschedule sports. And Friday, December 11th would be the regional decision, just so you can be thinking about that on a calendar. So that's the process that the executive board has accepted at this point. The other piece of this, which people tend to want to talk a lot about, is culminating events. So I'm going to let Andy Barnes talk a little bit about the decisions there.
Thanks, BJ. So in looking at the culminating events, the framework that the board provided, the staff and the district directors in each one of the regions to work with is that we would try to offer in team sports a culminating event that would get down to a Final Four. And so in working through this process, and determining what that might look like and how many teams we would need, we came up with 8 schools, a minimum of 8 schools participating in that sport, in that classification, in each region, would be utilized to determine if there's going to be a culminating event or not. And the way to come up with that number is we will utilize the district directors and the leadership within each one of those regions to do a count similar to what we do with allocations counting, is that by the end of the 4th week, if there are 8 schools in that region, in that classification that are offering the sport, then we will have a culminating event. If there are not 8 schools, they do have the ability to combine classifications in order to get the 8-school minimum for that. So that's the framework that we're using right now to determine if a culminating event will happen once we get the season started. So we will get that information out to each one of the district directors and to each one of the leadership within those regions to get a dashboard on how we can count that and know exactly what culminating events we're going to be offered. And as always, any alterations to the entire process that we've talked about here, you know, if a region has an alternate plan that they want to come up with, that can be submitted to Mick and or the executive board for review.
Great, thanks, Andy. So sort of next steps, as you know, the WIA's next step is to really kind of talk about these scheduled sports seasons and what sports will be offered at what time. I've kind of put in front of you there what we have right now. As you are well aware, season 2 is scheduled to have our traditional winter sports, followed by season 3, our fall sports, followed by season 4, our spring sports. And as Tim had shared earlier, this is sort of the next step, is to talk through what this is going to look like. We are going to lean a bit on the AD survey Just so you know, if you haven't looked at the results, we posted those on our COVID website, but just so you know, one of the questions you were asked is to prioritize how you think sports should be moved. And the one that came back with the highest score is to prioritize our low risk sports, followed by protecting spring sports, limiting conflicts, as you can see there on the screen. So leaning on some of that information, we do have 2 other ideas that have been offered to the executive board to kind of review. And I think part of the ask today is to make sure that you are communicating with your executive board and be thinking if you have any other ideas that should be considered. So one of the ideas is really to maintain these 3 seasons, but go ahead and prioritize those low risk sports, which would sort of move season 2 would offer fall sports with the exception of football, followed by spring sports, followed by winter. And then those winter sports would have football attached. So that's one of the ideas that has been brought forward, is really just to prioritize that low risk, but maintain the 3 sports. One of the other ideas that has been offered is to adjust to 2 seasons. Those 2 seasons would be longer, more like a 10-week season that would correlate a bit with semesters. And I think there's a lot of schools that are talking about staying at remote learning through the end of January. So this would sort of align with the academic programming that may be happening in different pockets of our state. So this particular one has season 1 being basically fall sports and some alternate sports. And then season 2 would be your traditional winter and spring sports. So those are just a couple of the ideas that have been offered. Obviously, want to remind you to communicate with your executive board members. They'll also be looking for some input from superintendents, because obviously that's an important group. One of the things that I wanted to mention was our LEAP students have been really actively involved in our board meetings, and they have been outstanding contributors. And sometimes when a student speaks, it helps people have a little different perspective. So I just really want to compliment the students on the LEAP that have been participating in our board meetings. So for you frequently asked questions, I'm going to let Mick sort of answer this one. It keeps popping up about what's the status of risk as assigned to some of our high risk sports.
So on the slide, you can see where the state has currently classified. There's a lot of questions bouncing up here, and one of them was, will the state reconsider these high risk? I will tell you this, it is incredibly important right now that we continue advocating to get the opportunity to move the level of risk as classified by the state. So you're gonna, after today, there's gonna be a survey that's gonna come out from the NFHS. In addition, I know WSSAAA is working on a little more detailed survey, Lawrence specifically, that's gonna launch. So when you see those, please fill those out right away, because that is the type, in our conversations with the governor's office and Department of Health, that's the information that we can use to move forward. The other thing to start considering based on conversations with them are which one of these high risk sports or moderate risk sports are we willing to play with a mask on? And I know that's a difficult question off the cuff to answer, so I don't want to debate it today, but to give it consideration, because what I have been told is if indoor sports can be played with a mask, they will consider, they haven't promised or committed to anything, but they would strongly consider changing the level of risk. We know in Michigan, recently they've announced that they're going to play basketball and wrestle with masks on. Could we play volleyball with a mask on and make it a low risk sport? The reason that's important is we can play low risk sports at any metric based on the current guidelines. We can have a metric of 200 cases per 100,000 and still qualify to compete against each other at a low risk sport. Now it's just a matter of, is that prudent and will our superintendent support it? So the survey information is going to be critical, just like our board used it to come up with the process shared today. The Department of Health and Governor's Office will strongly consider that. We also have the medical community right now working with us on advocating on similar lines of thinking. The last thing that I will tell you is we're going to put together a document for your superintendents. We all know that as athletic directors, we can all decide what is great and what we want to do, but without the support of our superintendents, it's not going to happen. We saw that happen in September. We had a WIAA season with nothing but low risk sports, and not a single school was able to play because we had a recommendation come from the governor's office. We now have different guidelines, but we're still going to need the superintendents to be comfortable to allow us to commence those. So we're going to work on some information with that. And a key piece will be the data that the NFHS collects. The goal is to have that results back by November 17th. And the doctor out of Wisconsin, Dr. McGuire, who's doing that, has said he will try to have at least preliminary results by December 1st, which will help us in our plan, as you saw on the timeline. So when you see those, please fill them out. It helps us as we go in and advocate for all the other arguments. I see the soccer one coming up. There's a study that came out. There's like 318,000 games played, no COVID cases. So the question is, are we willing to play soccer in the winter? Right? We know the clubs do it, but are we willing to do it if the board chooses to move a season to December 28th? So those are things we need ADs to help us with, and then we will continue to push forward on trying to give us more opportunity. So BJ, thanks.
Yep. One of the other questions that has popped up is, for some reason, if we do end up with sports overlapping, especially sports that traditionally haven't overlapped, could athletes potentially do 2 sports at one time? I don't know if JK or Mick wants to give an update on that.
Justin, why don't you take first shot? You've been working with SMAC.
Yeah, I can jump in. So based on our preliminary discussions with the SMAC committee, they would be they would be willing to have that discussion. I think it comes down to contact sports overlapping. They'd be more amenable to have a student athlete participate in track and football at the same time versus track and wrestling due to just the potential of concussions and head contact. So the contact sport, like multiple contact sports at one time, probably not as likely as allowing for basketball and track, or track and soccer, or basketball and soccer, those types of sports being paired together. So it'd be more around the contacts, not allowing that most likely.
And BJ, if I could just jump back in for a second, please. Seeing our friends from Eastern Washington, yeah, we understand that not all climates are going to allow this. So going back to the plan that BJ went through that we developed with the board, that's where if say soccer, women's soccer gets moved to December 28th and Region C says, hey, we cannot do this on this side, they can ask to move it, and then you tell us where you want to move it. And then we will work with you on that. So there's going to be flexibility built into this plan, depending on your regions. If you have a region that has more small schools and overlapping 2 sports that most of your students participate in doesn't work, you would be able to email or call me and say, hey, Mick, can you guys consider this? Then we'll work with the staff and the board and get back to you. And that's where we're really, the survey that was filled out requested local control, and we're going to leave that up to regions, but the board does have to set a WI schedule, and then we can accommodate local needs from that and do something about the weather over there, and this will be a lot easier, please.
Right. So we have just a few other little updates that are not necessarily COVID related, but thought we would just take a minute to give you some updates. So I'll let my coworkers walk down those 4 quick updates.
I think I'm taking digital ticketing, so I'll start there. We sent out an email to everybody back on October 26th in advance of a WSSAAA webinar they were hosting related to digital ticketing. Hopefully everybody got a chance to read that email and hopefully attend. There was some really important information related to that topic that was presented by WSSAAA. As part of that email, we sent out some information about GoFan, who's our digital ticketing provider. And that was basically just to provide an option to schools. I heard Lisa mention who they're working with during her presentation earlier. At the end of the day, this is kind of uncharted territory for a lot of people. I know that's one of the questions that came up during the WSSAAA workshop is who's working with vendors right now. And up until this year, digital ticketing hasn't really been an option used by a lot of our schools. And part of that is we have some really stringent third-party receipting rules in our state that prohibit schools from using digital ticketing on the local level unless it's being done in compliance. And so the biggest takeaway from that WSSAAA information is to work with your business manager and make sure that any vendor you're considering is in compliance and approved and following your district policy. That's really essential and something you're going to continue to hear from us and from WSSAAA and ultimately your business managers. So we're going to be we're coordinating with GoFan right now to offer a webinar next week with information about that option. At the end of the day, though, we just want you to figure out what works best for your school. And again, just making sure that it is in alignment with your district policy.
Yeah, I think I've got esports. So esports update, we continue to have a number of conversations with a couple of different vendors. We've gotten into secondary conversations and meetings with a couple of different vendors. I met with 3 different companies over the last week and a half. And so we're really feeling good about kind of where we're at in this process since we had to kind of restart the entire search again. And so our goal is that we hope to have something in place to allow registrations to begin in January and have some sort of an offering for a spring season this year in esports. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of finalize our platform and the vendor that we'll be using here in the next couple of weeks and over the next month, and then make an announcement about that and have registrations ready to go once we come back from the holiday breaks, and then have those spring seasons ready to go and offered. So that's kind of the esports update. Mick, do you want to add anything else into that?
No, I mean, our goal right now is to try to have something in place in January at some point. And Justin has led this work in the last month, and we've narrowed it down to just a couple providers. And so it's just a matter of once we finish this work in November with our board, bringing that forward to them in December. So.
Activities update. Obviously, OSPI had released their school safety document last month, and that was in conjunction with a number of different organizations, including the Department of Health. Within that, there were some pretty strict guidelines and restricting band and other musical and all of our arts programs and kind of what they could do. And so there's been a similar to the athletics world, there's been a little bit of an upheaval from the music world mostly. And so they've been writing to the governor's office, they've been writing to the Department of Health and advocating for their students to be able to get back and offer the music programs within schools and the arts within schools as well. So we've continued to send the information that we have from the aerosol study from the NFHS, along with other information that we've got. We're working with WMEA, our thespian group as well, on information and data that we've been sending into the Department of Health. I got an update yesterday that the guidelines are going to be, they're within the DOH, they're on the desk that need to be reviewed. And so those folks are going to be taking a look at them. They are anticipating having some sort of an update within the next couple of weeks around music specifically. Within the guidelines, the forensics and our thespian groups have a little bit more flexibility than our music departments right now. So that work is continuing. We hope to see an update here, like I said, in the coming weeks from the Department of Health as they review those guidelines and work with OSPI to restrict the some of the protocols that they've had in place, and to kind of take the aerosol information in and make some decisions based off of that study. And once we get more information from the NFHS, that study should be finalized this month, I believe, and the data was targeted to be released by December. So as we get that information, we'll be sure to send that on to the Department of Health as well, and partner up with WMEA to continue to push and advocate for all of our students that are involved in our 3 activities.
Yeah, the next one for rules clinics. We had originally targeted November 1st as our launch for the season 2 rules clinics. We're going to hold off until the board meeting to see if there's any changes to seasons with that before we post any rules clinics. We know you want to get your coaches having something to do with those. So we will wait until after the next board meeting on the 17th, and then we will move forward with rules clinics at that point.
Thanks, Andy. So really the last screen here is just sort of kind of looking ahead. So you are aware November 17th is the next board meeting. So between now and November 17th, it's important that you are talking with your local board members about your thinking around seasons. We will have a WSSAAA Wednesday the day after that to be able to give you updates. And then of course, November 27th is the preliminary day for information to come out, and you can see the different dates in December that will be sort of impacting the work that you're doing and the work that we're all doing to get our kids back to playing. So if there are any questions or anything else, we are done with our presentation. Thank you so much for your time. This is great to see a couple hundred people involved in this. I'm happy, if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, once in a while people reach out to me and I'm happy to email them to you. So feel free to let me know if you'd like to have that. Cole, if there's no questions specifically that need to be answered, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff that's coming through the chat room, so you guys can continue to take a look at that. In the meantime, Jeff Lowell back in the game and ready to chat with us about mentoring and WSSAAA Wednesday extension. Jeff, take it away, man.
Good morning, everybody. I have no idea what happened. I'm up in Island County on Whidbey Island and just got kicked off of the call. It took me about 8 minutes to try and get back in. Really windy up here today. So just to give everybody an update, we've started the WSSAAA Wednesday extensions. In the last couple of months, we actually had sessions after, the week after one of these WSSAAA Wednesday meetings that everybody could log into. They could end up asking additional questions. And what Jeff Peets and I ended up talking through with mentors is that the attendance, although we had some attending, we figured that this is where we get everybody, 200 plus people versus maybe 50 that stick around. So what we're going to do is we're going to try something. And again, Jeff and I are continuing to try new things just to make sure we can give you what you need. This is not just new athletic directors, but this is all athletic directors across the state. So what we're going to be doing is actually just keeping those WSSAAA Wednesday extensions during this time. We're going to tag on to the end of a regular WSSAAA Wednesday session. Anybody who wants to stick around, they can do so. We can, I don't know if you were here the last time, but if you did and you stuck around, you got to hear me soapbox for probably just a little while. I use the term monologuing, right? If you ever watch The Incredibles and watch the supervillain syndrome, that's what I felt like. I was monologuing for a little while. And then what we're going to do in the off weeks from the WSSAAA Wednesday extension is we're going to use this same time, this 8 o'clock time frame, to come back. And if there is follow-up from today, for example, that holds us accountable to come back the next Wednesday and report back to you on what we've found out or what we've done in the meantime. So between the mentors and then Jeff and I as co-mentor directors, we'll be putting that structure together. It's been sent out to everybody. Should have been sent out to everybody at least, and everybody should be able to see that new structure. But this way, you have this time already set on your calendars, 2 weeks out of the month, and you can just set aside some time at 8 o'clock on those other Wednesdays to continue to engage. As we said early today, the best way for us to continue to develop a deep understanding about what's going on across the state is to find time to connect. And when there's 200 plus of us that are here, then that's going to be the best way to do it in some of our minds. So we're going to try this and see if it works. And if we need to adjust again, as we also heard earlier today, blessed are the flexible, because, whatever the saying was, and I know I'm not exactly the most physically flexible individual, so I'm going to continue to work on that. and hope I don't pull a hamstring from all the quick motion from one direction to another. So that's really the update here. The mentor newsletter continues to go up. I have been meaning to, to finalize something that I'm hoping to add, and I think it's probably going to be an after January 1st thing, where Jeff and I are looking at the addition of a podcast, and so that's one other thing that I'm working on. It's slow going right now with everything else going on, but that's something else you guys can be looking for from the mentor program down the road. So if that's the only formal thing that I wanted to talk about, and then the rest of it is really going to be going back into what we heard this morning and seeing if there's things that all of you would like to spend some more time talking about. What I talked to some of the executives about yesterday is not necessarily forcing them to stay on. They've got other things they could be doing. They could be moving on, and this allows us an opportunity to brainstorm, throw ideas out, and not put somebody on the spot to give an answer today, but really to work through what those thoughts are, get them down clearly, and then provide the staff with an ask and for some further information. So, Cole, if there's nothing else formal right now, we can start the extension. We've got until 10 o'clock on the calendar. And there's a couple of things that I heard that I'd like to circle back to. So let me know, Cole.
Yeah, let's just do a quick wrap up and let those folks go who need to go, and we'll go from there. But
okay.
And I'll just, in case you guys didn't notice in the chat, we went ahead and put the PowerPoint in there for you. I didn't realize that there was going to be that many people on it after 20 emails popped through all of a sudden. There it is. Grab it. For some reason, if you're not sure how to do that, then go ahead and shoot me an email and I'll get it sent to you. But thank you for your patience on that.
Yeah, thanks Andy Barnes for throwing that, or Andy Knapp, sorry, for throwing that up there, and Andy Barnes for answering questions. One thing I just added a link to the most recent WSSAAA magazine. If you guys haven't looked through that yet, there's some really good articles. Was in conversation with Rob Hill yesterday about his article. After not having sports for a while, it was nice to see Rob's article and just the power that sport brings with it, and through the power of experience. So had a good chat with Rob via email, but take a look. There's some really good stuff in there regarding leadership from Scott Payne at Chelan. Yeah, just a really high quality publication, I thought. So thanks to Joe Keller for putting that together with the help of Mascot Media. So hey, thank you guys all for joining us today. We got time to stick around for the WSSAAA Wednesday extension if you want to. If you don't want to, absolutely no worries at all. But just wanted to wish you guys a happy rest of your week, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Brian Kane will be joining us for our next WSSAAA Wednesday. He's certain to bring some energy and some juice to us. So looking forward to that coming up here in a couple of weeks. So if you guys don't have anything else, want to send you off and have a great week, and stick around for a WSSAAA Wednesday extension if you'd like. Thanks a lot.
Well, I'm running down the road trying to loosen my load. I got 7 women on my mind. 4 that want to own me, 2 that want to stone me, 1 says she's a friend of mine. Take it easy.
Gosh, I really think I missed my calling as a producer for like a television show or something, because
Your timing is impeccable, Cole.
take it away, Jeff.
And good morning to all of you who have stuck around. You know, the place I'll start is this: the real thought behind trying to just open it up into a discussion at this point is really to spend some time trying to get past the emotion of all the stuff that we're talking about right now. I mean, all of these topics are highly emotional for a lot of different reasons. And trying to get past that emotion so that we can think, clearly, and really think kind of broad spectrum as to everything that's going to go into the decisions that are being made and trying to get these seasons off the ground. And being able to provide a space where people can actually listen to others' perspectives and really think through all of these things by hearing from others in different areas of the state and why it is that we're potentially doing some things differently is really kind of the thought behind this. So today, I think there's probably 2 or 3 areas that I'd like to start with, and I'm going to start with what we just heard, and what I'm going to say cautiously encouraged about is that the executive board yesterday made a decision that provides a very clear metric rather than an emotion to make a decision, and also provided then some local input into how those metrics are going to apply to each of our areas. So this that's the first thing I'm gonna end up saying, and I appreciate that clarity, and then being able to back out a number of weeks and be able to communicate with our own communities about what's going on. So I want to make sure everybody understands the multi-step process that has been shared right now. And if there are any questions about the 4-week, 3-week, 2-week step-by-step process, and then after that 2-week decision, then what your region may be able to do, I think now would be a good time to start talking through that. So if anybody has any question, I'm not a huge chat guy. I'd much rather somebody just turn their mic on and shout a question out, and let's start talking about it. And if it's silent, that's awesome also. I thought it was I thought it was pretty clear, but I know I got 3 or 4 immediate calls yesterday from people that were a little bit confused. So I think that gives BJ and Mick and everybody else some pretty good feedback that they explained it pretty well today. The second part of this is the other thing that I think is really important, and I would love to hear what other areas of the state and what other leagues are thinking about. And that is the fact that the executive board a couple weeks from now is still going to be thinking of creative solutions. You saw the 2, the idea of keeping 3 seasons, but now let's flip the seasons and have fall first, spring second, and winter third. And then the second idea that was shared with the executive board is the 2-season approach, fall and alternate seasons for 10 weeks, and then winter and spring after that. And are there other ideas that leagues have been talking about? Why are you talking about them? What potential concerns do you have about the 2 that were shared? And then I'll end up giving my 2 cents at the end of this discussion about how best to get those ideas back to the executive board. So anybody have any thoughts about the 2-season or the 2 approaches that were brought up during that meeting?
Hey, Jeff, just a reminder too to everybody is that really we have 3. We have our current one right now, and we could apply our process and we could just go forward with what we currently have. And then we have those 2 new ones that are kind of general, and I think we'll get those kind of fleshed out a little bit. But so really we have 3 that we're looking at, and as was mentioned before, the ability of a region or even going down to the league level, district level, to make a local decision if a particular league or district didn't want to be involved in a culminating event. And we've tried to make that process real easy, just a petitioning Mick in a written form about, hey, this is what we'd like to do. And then the board has given Mick the authority to just go ahead and, hey, approve them as they come along. So we really have a lot of flexibility built in, but just kind of thinking about those 3 And knowing athletic directors, there's probably another 50 out there, ideas that you have. And the board members that are on the call and the board members in general are very interested in hearing your input. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. And let's circle back to that idea of the culminating event in just a few minutes and being able to, this is my term, potentially opt out of a culminating event. Let's circle back to that. But are there other ideas that leagues have been talking about, or are there concerns with any of the three that have been shared this morning?
Jeff, can I just jump in? Rock Winters from Zilla High School. I appreciate what Tim just said, because for 1A schools, we're thinking keeping the traditional seasons together, and what we have set up right now is really like our only option, our main option, with so many 2 and 3 sport athletes. Trying to move things around, almost any other option is, I just see, causes a lot of difficulties. And I know we're in a situation where maybe we can't do it, but what arms do we need to twist? Who do we need to talk to? We saw that we were allowed to have these practices. Somehow that changed, and we were allowed to have these practices. And if we have to have games with no fans there and all the kids wearing masks or whatever we have to do, just keeping the traditional seasons, really, to me, is the only thought I can think of. Thanks.
Thank you, Rock. And that is a really good point, that there are a good many schools in this state that rely on the same kids for all of these programs. And when programs start to, eat each other, so to speak, they start to, try and force kids from making a choice or being able to play all three into making a choice. That's not necessarily where any school wants to be. Concern. Yeah, go ahead. Lauren? Go ahead, hop in.
I'd just pop in that it's not kids too, it's also our coaches. They may not be multiple head coaches, but they could be valuable assistants in our other programs that if we conflict those seasons, now we take them out of our coaching pool, and that could hurt.
It's very true too. I will say, for any of you who haven't been doing any in-person activities, across our 4 schools right now, I have 2,243 kids signed up to do in-person conditioning across the Bellevue School District, across 4 schools. And it takes all hands on deck. I mean, there's a ton of coaches that are out there working with different programs to make sure that social distancing is met and kids are following other safety protocols and making sure that there is adequate supervision. And when we start to pit the adults against one another also, and you don't have enough bodies, that's when mistakes happen. That's when things end up blowing up for us. So that's a really good point too, Lauren. I appreciate that.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
Don. Hey, you're asking a question about thinking kind of outside the box, and now that District 1 is matched up with District 2 in this region. Concern is obviously that a lot of those schools are in the King County area that may not get permission to participate because of the levels of COVID there. But in District 1, we were thinking within our own league, because we have 16 schools now, that at the very least, if we had to, we would come up with some sort of creative culminating event with a league tournament or something and cap off, hey, you're the champion of a league tournament type of thing. So that's kind of a fallback that we are considering here in the Northwest Conference.
Thanks, Don. I do know that it's one of the things the KingCo conference was talking about the other day. ADs met on Monday, and one thing that drives a lot of these decisions right now is this idea of a culminating event, and that is an important element of what the WIAA brings to athletic programming across the state. But are we at a point, and this is a question I think all of us should think about and then be able to share with our executive board members, but are we at a point where the best chance we have to pull off a season for kids is if we are actually staying really close to home? And the farther away from home we get, the less chance we actually have to pull it off. And if our league seasons, our regular seasons, are being determined by a culminating event, does that add an element that makes it even more difficult to get a regular season off the ground for kids? So that's something I think all of us really should be thinking about. Realistically, we should be thinking about it diligently. We should be talking to others in our area about that. And I would certainly hate for a decision about a culminating event to cause one corner of the state to say, we just can't do anything right now.
It was funny because when after the release of the information from the WIAA yesterday, I got 12 emails from parents saying, we're not concerned about a culminating event. Let's just do something. And so that's those responses I got from
Rainy.
parents. So
Looking up.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Don. So I've sent a survey out to the kids that are participating in Bellevue twice already this fall. I have another one that'll go out at the end of the month, and ask them, even with the limitations on what we're able to do, if they're enjoying themselves. And when I get back 1,300 responses, and about 96 to 97% of those responses are, we're enjoying ourselves. And I talk to coaches and they say that it's the highlight of a kid's day right now. That's something we need to keep in mind also. And there are going to be those that are disappointed that we don't give them the entire 8-course meal. But at some point, it's better to be able to sit down to dinner than to worry about being at an 8-course meal. So yeah, go ahead.
I just said I totally agree with
Okay.
what you just said.
Well, hey, Jeff, I was going to comment. I was able to get on here. I know there's no perfect system, and I appreciate the WIAA coming out with the process and having the flexibility that we've kind of separated into, like, I guess you could say 3 states, 3 states within the state, that if, there's no need to hold back a certain region if they can't participate, because we'll never have a crossover with that region anyway. So that allows it to be a little bit more flexible. And I know at our league level, we're really, I think, going to dive into how to keep it local, as you've been saying and other people have been saying, because there's a better chance of that happening. We've already discussed, I know we're into an agreement with districts 5 and 6 for the culminating event and an event leading up to the culminating event. But at our district level, we have 7 teams in our 1A league. We have already developed a 7-team district tournament and play it all the way through with placings, so that it maximizes the number of games a school could get, but it also gives the kids something to play for, knowing that that's kind of the plan B or plan T, as Lisa said, that if we get to that, we already have something in place where the kids have played for something, and you can hey, we got 5th place in league this year. We actually played a game for 5th, not just based on what our standings were. So I think a lot of it is going to come down to that local decision of staying as close to home as possible.
Thanks, Jeff. John Applegate, you look like you want to say something.
I usually have something to say. I'm going to jump on my good friend Rock and Don's bandwagon here, because we have such different challenges in our regions, in our leagues. And I sit in King County with a 123 transmission rate right now. That makes it really challenging to convince school leaders even to let us do low risk, as we're not putting kids back in school yet. And then you couple that with challenges that smaller schools will have with the things that Rock pointed out, with coaches, with players that can't participate in having enough players to put the sports on. So those challenges are unique for each area. And I'll echo the sentiment that just because King County's in a 123 transmission rate should have anything to do with what goes on in beautiful Pullman. And they should be able to get done what they need to get done over there, and even if we can't do it. And so I guess I'm going back to the point that Rick made in the chat during the meeting, is that idea of that local control, and that the ability for the leagues to be able to make their decision. And I agree with you, Jeff, 100%, that our decision shouldn't be made starting with the culminating event and what that looks like. Our decision should be made on getting kids active, getting kids involved in re-engage them with school, all the things we preach about with education-based athletics, and less about the championship.
And I'm gonna say the only thing I'm gonna wonder about what you just said, John, is the statement about Pullman being beautiful. And I'm gonna ask somebody that's around you to sniff your coffee cup and see what's actually in it. So
I put that in the chat too, John, so you can see that.
All right. Well, all the cougs on this clock or on this meeting can jump in for these. First of all, Jeff's not a Husky, so don't let him even pretend. So
I'll say Pullman High School is good, but I wouldn't say WSU because that's the reason our COVID rates are so high. So I kind of say Pullman High School, yes. WSU, not so much.
Well, in fairness, Chris, our rates jumped up in King County when the Huskies went back in September. So
yeah, I think Cole's probably seen the same thing at Ellensburg, and Jeff said in Cheney. I think it's just everywhere.
Yeah,
for sure.
So I think we could probably talk in circles around this particular topic for a long time. And what I would ask you to do is to email Pete's and I just with things that you think you might need to help you make this decision or help you get into your league discussions and really end up coming up with some ideas that would end up benefiting the executive board as they end up thinking a couple weeks from now too. So take a day or two and think about it, and you can email us, and then between now and next Wednesday, if there are specific items you need, whether it is more information from the WIAA, if it's the opportunity to connect with another league, if it's whatever it might be, just send that message over this way. Jeff and I will figure out a way to put it together and then be ready for you next Wednesday to present it back to you then. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and this is something that I don't think I've heard a lot of discussion about, other than can we end up having kids play multiple sports in a season? And actually, I'll actually clarify that. And I know BJ continues to talk about eligibility. But all of these discussions around rules or all these discussions about seasons and changing things and moving things around, there are rules that end up going along with all these things. So if there are rules that are going to be impacted by change, one of the other things the executive board should have in November on that 17th is a list of the rules that we believe need to be considered and potentially either waiving or altering or saying, yeah, this is what we're going to do for this year. So as you're going through and you're talking through these things, have your handbook next to you and go into the rules and take a look at what rules are going to be impacted by whatever change is being made. And whether that is, the basic one that we've just talked about, participating in two sports in the same season, whether it is what the rule that says, hey, you're going to try out for one sport and then you don't make it and you go to a different one, and the number of practices for that. Whatever rule you think needs to be looked at, again, they need that list, because the last thing we need is for these changes to be made and then find out that there is a rule that's going to negatively impact the ability to execute a plan. So Tim and the other 12 board members I would imagine would appreciate that level of scrutiny on the handbook while these plans are being put together.
Hey, Jeff, I got a couple thoughts. One, Utah talked about doing away with grade requirements right now with kids at home and the struggles of being kind of isolated. If we do get back, we've seen some of that. Some really good students who are not doing very well from home. I think to use that against somebody being active and using the one positive thing, I think that's a thought that I would have for any activity right now. I thought that was one of the good things that came out of Utah. The other, I guess, going back a little bit, are we kind of just set and just saying, hey, we don't think the governor and Department of Health are going to move on this? I mean, we've got a ton more data than we did a few months ago with, the Wisconsin study, with the one just posted here, with the soccer. Inslee's talked about, he goes with the science. The science is out there right now, and the best place to be is really in schools and playing sports is what it looks like. So I don't know. Have we exhausted that avenue of trying to get kids back, or is that should we just not worry about that?
So Ryan, if I'm hearing you correctly with the second thing, you're wondering if there is still advocacy going on at the state level to continue to potentially loosen the restrictions or the recommendations, right? You know, and the way I described what Mick and the staff was able to talk to the governor's office and the DOH about is to put a ceiling in place, and anything we can't go above that ceiling. We'll hit our heads and that's where we end. So that's as loose as we can get. And what I have heard, and BJ or anybody else who's still on this call from the office can correct me. What I've heard is they continue to go back and they continue to talk to their contacts in those offices, and they're providing them with whatever information that they can gather, which is why these surveys that are coming out, and I'm going to use the term survey fatigue, because I know our school district has probably sent out, I don't know, 400 surveys in the last 3 weeks, and people just, you can hear them screaming around Bellevue. No more surveys, right? I don't want to do it. But we need to stay diligent when Lauren McDaniel sends her survey out, and that survey is going to be around participation right now and positive COVID rates and all of those kind of things in our districts. And then the other data collection surveys that are coming out, we definitely need to weigh in on those, because that's what they're going to take back to those government agencies to end up continuing to advocate that ceiling shouldn't be at 10 feet, it should be at 15 feet. And then to go to what Mick said earlier, and that's the idea of superintendents, and superintendents are going to have to weigh in. And what John just said, especially around our area, there are a great many superintendents that are worried about the optics of bringing kids into a school to participate in a sport in a gym when they can't bring a kid into school to take a math class. And you know, if the ceiling was higher, if it was 15 feet rather than 10, maybe some would be more more open to that idea. And BJ, if I'm wrong about that, just jump in and tell me. Okay, then that's great. And going back to the first part you brought up, that's a great rule. That's a great example of a rule to really look at and have the executive board look at as well. Does it make sense this year in an age where, you know, Lord knows what kids are facing in their own homes, and does it make sense to hold them to the same academic standard that we would if they had been taught in person? And I don't know. I don't know if it is. And just to be completely transparent. And yes, D's, I see everybody in the chat right now, D's and F's and everything else are really difficult. Maybe it's something that we, and Jeff brought something. I'll bring that back up in just a second, Jeff Chandler. So one of the other things I think we can think about when it comes to academic eligibility is the idea that the executive board potentially could waive that rule and say that districts, each school district, has to come up with with an academic eligibility plan for kids, right? That's going to maintain the equity, maintain the elimination of barriers, maintain all the other things that we're all working towards right now. And those are really important things for all of us to be thinking about. I like that, Ryan, a lot. Steve Bridge earlier ended up bringing up other eligibility rules. You know, does it, the one thing I would say everybody could go in and look at, and I've had at least, BJ, you'll be happy to know this, I've had at least 10 people that have emailed or called and asked me about eligibility. And especially when we're talking about kids that are thinking about one school district to another. Well, I can do something on the field in school district B when I'm at school district A. And where do I get to point them? I get to point them back to, you're part of the web page that you guys have done such a good job in developing. But is are the rest of those eligibility rules something else that needs to be looked at? There are kids that are going to online schools, right? And they may have been in your school on some sort of a waiver so that they could go to your school rather than their neighborhood school, and they did that during the open enrollment window going into 9th grade. But going to an online school like WIAA or Insight, they may feel like they're more successful there than they would be in your school's online online options, and they wouldn't be eligible at your school according to the so go back and look at some of those. I think those rules are really key. Any others that anybody can think of right now or would like to talk about more next week?
Hey, Jeff, real quick on the academic one.
Yeah.
I just wanted to touch on that one. I've been reassigned as an assistant principal, so I've been doing home visits, and I did a home visit last week, and it's just eye-opening. I mean, I think of my own kids, and I think it's tough on them, but we have a big house and we go places and things like that, but there are kids out there. This family that I visited, there were 2 girls in an apartment that was like probably 300 square feet. They were having connectivity issues, and the mom works all day long, and so she was begging me, they were a Hispanic family, so there was a translator, just begging, hey, when can they go back to school? I work, I can't supervise them. When they can't get online, there's nobody to help them. And it kind of was eye-opening just seeing that, and this was a family with only 2 kids. I know families with 6 or 7 kids and in a space that small. So I'm usually one that would never think about waiving standards or anything like that, but I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that there's people out there like this that through no fault of their own, they just can't, the kids can't do what they normally would do. So just wanted to bring that up. And then the other thing is I was visiting with that family, I just thought of the mental health piece, and just the balance between mental health and, the safety of coming back on campus. It's just, at some point, where is it, where does it become, worse to not allow kids back on campus, even with the risks that are associated with that. So just kind of an eye-opening experience that I wanted to share for everybody's consideration.
Brian, thank you. And those are really good points. The the mental health aspect of what we're all dealing with right now too. And I think looking at the faces on this call, I got to imagine that every one of us has had to think of ways to try and compartmentalize things and find ways to try and take care of ourselves also. And if it's difficult for us, then it's definitely going to be difficult for kids as well. So I appreciate you bringing those up. A couple other rules that I potentially think might be worth looking at and maybe talking about again next week. The previous semester rule is an academic one also. The way the rules are written right now, and when and how ineligibility would be applied would be really strange. So that's one. I like somebody put in their attendance, and who knows what somebody's attendance was last year, and maybe they logged out the last 3 weeks of last school year, and according to the rules they would be impacted by that as soon as the season began this year, right? And that's not necessarily a good thing either. So there's a number of them I think we need to be thinking about at that point. The thing I do want to circle back to real quick, Jeff Chandler, and if you want to talk about this a little bit more, I think I know which interview you're talking about. Rob McKenna was interviewed on a podcast about a month ago, a little over a month ago, maybe. And one of the things that Rob explained is really just the Washington State laws around liability. And one of the reasons that many school districts are really concerned right now has to do with the fact that if there is a lawsuit from somebody about anything, and they sue an individual and they sue a school district, and they prevail,
but the individual does not have the ability to pay, even if the school district is only 1% liable, they end up having to pick up the cost because of the other person's inability to pay. So it's a great interview. Jeff, if you want to, if you want to share some, if you want to share some more, go ahead and jump in. Otherwise, if you could just put in the chat a link to that so that people could, could look at it, that'd be great. And then I do want to spend the last 5 minutes, if we can, just talking about HB 1660. That's been brought up. I know since the last WSSAAA Wednesday, I've had to fight my blood pressure. I don't think I've ever had a meeting where I could literally feel my blood pressure spike that day. And I was really, worried about my colleague from Wenatchee, who I thought was probably out breaking things after that meeting was over with. And what I will say is that I've had probably 10 conversations about HB 1660 afterwards. What I do know has gone on, WSBO has actually updated their Q&A. So their Q&A is probably about what I would say maybe 40% helpful. And there's still many other questions that need to be answered. What I'm doing inside the Bellevue School District is actually putting together a work group with students and school-based personnel and budget office individuals, and we're gonna take a crack at trying to through a work group try to figure out what we're doing here in Bellevue to make sure that we're going to remain in compliance with the law. And as I've let my blood pressure come down, Steve Bridge will come back to that in just a second. What I still would like to do with this particular group is actually create a roundtable and have basically the 4 or 5 areas that HB 1660 is asking us to really go back and take a look at in our districts and make sure that we're actually doing a little bit differently than we have in the past. That people have an opportunity to actually, share what they're doing, what they have questions about, where the concerns lie. And then one of the areas that I'd actually like to add into this roundtable would be ideas for data collection this year. And there was an immediate, kind of an immediate reaction after this meeting a couple weeks ago to collect data to throw, kind of throw out there right now. And the question that kept coming back to me was, to what end? And I wasn't sure exactly what that data would do because it's not going to change the law. The law is there. It's something that we've got to follow. But what is really probably important for all of us to be thinking about is how we're going to collect data so that what we can do is go back to our own representatives at the local level and then share with those on the education committee that really pushed through this bill a year ago, just how negatively and in what areas the application of this law as it's been written is affecting schools. So that's one area that I'm thinking about in this work group too. But I'm going to open it up, and you guys give me this idea of a roundtable. You guys give me an idea of whether or not you would be interested in that kind of a meeting.
Jeff, can I jump in here real quick?
Please.
This whole legislative process thing and things like this sneaking up on us, we all want to believe that the communication's in place, that stuff like this doesn't happen, but that's not necessarily the case. So I think the lesson here for all of us is to make some contact with our local legislators ahead of time and ask them to be on a communication level with you, or if there's educational bills that are up there, to at least give you a holler, or your superintendents, and bounce it off of them to get some input. In the perfect world, that's the way it's supposed to be. But there's legislators out there that just kind of want to get a notch on their legislative gun, so to speak. And, it's like that's the thing to pass something. And, I experienced this 2 years ago. Most of you are aware that
the state tournament. There was a group that was trying to get the state tournament to back to the way it used to be. And there was a local legislator here in Spokane that was having a pickup basketball game with a friend of his who was a high school basketball coach. And the basketball coach said, hey, we want this, the state tournament the way it used to be. And so he creates legislation just because of a pickup basketball game, just because he thought it had some merit. That's nuts. And, all of us being aware, I mean, we can't count on lobbyists. We can't count on one or two people to bring it to our attention. I mean, obviously this is in our wheelhouse now, and we can't ignore it. And I know this, it's a major wake-up call for me, if I'm going to be part of this organization to be more aware of what things like this are happening. But, now we're dealing with the after effect of this. Everybody has to deal with what's this going to do. And, we can be upset as everybody was the other day, but the real key here is to, we're all just going to have to be more aware of this legislative process and just try to pay attention to who our local leadership is and develop a relationship with them. And, in our school boards and our superintendents, it's just important to be aware of this, because to get caught like this and to have to react to it. I mean, the whole thing, I think, that was driving everybody nuts, was driving me nuts anyway, I'll speak for myself, is that during this time, for something like this to come out, I mean, it just felt like they were just taking your face and rubbing it in it, just dealing with one more issue, and it just doesn't feel very good. So that being said, just be aware of this process and who your legislators are, and maybe reach out to them and share your concern and establish a relationship. We have a survey. WASA is putting together a survey. Lauren's helping us with this. We're going to see it here soon that just talks about this process for House Bill 1660. Did your superintendents know about it? Did your principals know about it? And we're just going to try to gather some data to at least stir the pot and try to make sure something like this doesn't happen again.
So just to add a little bit of clarity to this. This is Representative Berquist actually was working on something for 3 straight years. And the bill that he first introduced was actually to limit the cost of ASB cards and to put into law how much each school could then charge for ASB cards. And that actually got shot down pretty hard, didn't really get out of committee even. And then this bill, he worked on it for 2 years. So it wasn't that it was, really kind of snuck through. But what I heard from multiple schools in Kinko is that he actually called them, knowing him from his time as a coach in Renton, and asked them about things, got answers that he didn't like, and then proceeded to move forward with what he wanted to do anyway. It is the process itself is flawed, and that is something that Dave is absolutely correct on, that this is flawed. And the one thing that I would disagree with Representative Berquist about if he was here today is the fact that anybody could have gone and testified before his education committee about this particular bill. When I was receiving notices about it, and I wouldn't receive notices about those hearings until the day of. So there was no way to say how, unless you do exactly what Dave said. So, so I know we're running up against time. I don't want to keep everybody too long. There is, I would say that the feeling I get from everybody is that they would love to have the opportunity to talk in depth about HB 1660, in part about what it is that they don't know, in part about what specifics other people do know that they can share with them, and in part about kind of the process to get this thing passed and how we could make sure as a group that our voice is heard in the future. So what I'll do is I'll reach out to those a couple weeks ago that said that they were interested in helping out with that. We'll put it together and look for that before the middle of this month. Okay, it shouldn't be that hard to put that together. And then the last thing I'll say in closing, Rick O'Leary, you know, I do appreciate the chance that you and I have to talk back and forth. What you put in the chat right there is something that I certainly hope people end up taking back. And I also hope that they take back the idea, and this is one thing that I've heard from multiple people in the last 4 or 5 days too. We have to think of safety elements for other sports. So cross country is a low risk sport. Could it be offered in December? The answer is yes, but every one of us would then be, should be really concerned about a large number of our students meeting at a school and beginning a run out in our communities when it is going to become ultimately really, really dark. And they're going to be out on streets with a ton of traffic. And how are we feeling about that too? So we need to think about some of those safety elements. As we just say, we can bounce them around. We can offer low sports at certain times of the year. There are elements of each one of these sports that they're offered when they are for a good reason. And we need to keep that in mind as we move forward as well. Okay.
Hey, Jeff, I had first off, appreciate the extended meetings, like a therapy group. I feel like I should say, hi, my name is Tony and I'm an athletic director. Just to two thoughts. One of them is Mick had talked about the superintendents, and Jeff, you had also mentioned the optics. And I agree with you on that, but I also think that there's a piece to that of if they'll move forward, and I believe if they move forward together. And so, Mick, I think you meet with them or are part of the OSPI meetings that they have. And superintendents have a lot of other things on their plate, but this one is rising higher and higher on their list because of the mental health aspect of it. And if there's a way to get them to come together as the Bellevue School District or the District 2 superintendents, there's comfort, there's cover for them when they move forward together. And I think that's a way to target it as we're moving forward rather. The other, and I think it can be a positive, and it might just be me, and if it is, then tell me who to call and I'll reach out to them. But the esports, when I mention it in our building, we have a group of kids who aren't necessarily involved in something right now. They get really excited just by the mention of that option. And can just tell me either where to look or just what will that look like? It'll have a season, and then kids in their facility competing against kids at another facility. Are they coming together? Can someone just give me just a thumbnail of what that's going to look like? I think that can be a huge positive, and especially if we don't get outside, and I hope to goodness that we do. But there is an opportunity for that group of kids to at least to compete and participate. So can somebody just give me a quick version of what that'll look like?
Hey, Tony, it's Justin. I'll take a stab at it. Mick, you can back me up on it, but really there's multiple ways to do esports. It kind of lends itself to be open-ended and a little bit flexible on how a state association can present it. Now, certain titles or games in this case do have specific seasons that they have to be played in on certain platforms. And so as part of the process and us reviewing a platform for a statewide push is looking at what those requirements are when those sports seasons are offered for those different titles. And then again, looking at the number of titles that we would offer because for a varsity level game, there are only a certain number of spots available for a varsity competition. So we're working with those vendors that we're talking to right now about ways to expand that to allow for sub-varsity or open gaming at those levels to maximize that potential exposure to those kids, knowing that that's a high priority for schools and reaching out and giving those kids a community to go to. So those are all different things that we're looking at. Now, the way the competitions work, it can be set up in various ways as well. That's, again, the nice thing about esports. I was on watching a Twitch video, which you'll become a professional in if you offer esports. But I watched some kids from Cole's School in Ellensburg playing a team at Cedar Woolley last week on Super Smash Brothers. And then there were kids from O'Day High School that joined in just to watch the game. So the networking capabilities and the availability for a kid in, Northeast Washington to play a kid in Southwest Washington is open. So we just have to, once we settle on a platform, we have to kind of decide on what the structure of the league looks like. If it's going to be open-ended across the state, if we're going to kind of put it into our natural traditional sports leagues, and then discuss kind of how, state culminating events would offer. There's also potential where we could work with other state associations and offer something beyond our state championship. Perhaps, just using a reference, perhaps we have our state champions compete against Washington State or Oregon State champions or Alabama State champions in different events. So there's a lot of room, there's a lot of flexibility, there's a lot of creativity that can be offered up with esports, and a lot of opportunity for inclusiveness within the schools. So
are there specific, that was helpful. Are there specific games that they'll be competing in that I can help get the word out, and kids can start getting ready in those games?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a long title or a long list of titles. I've got my list somewhere around here, but really one of the biggest games is League of Legends. We're working through the various vendors that we're talking to. There's some conversation about the exclusivity to that game and how that works. So we have to work with whatever vendor we decide to go with. We'll have to work with them on the potential of making that available. Super Smash Brothers, Mario Kart. There's also talk of utilizing FIFA, which is the soccer game, which would be huge for many of our students. There's also potential for Madden, NBA 2K, the NHL game. And then there's a vast array of them. And so when we decide on a vendor, one of the things that we'll have to do is we'll have to kind of sit down and figure out what titles we would offer, especially in this first year on this trial period, and then look at expanding those titles as we go on a long-term project. But those are some of the more popular games that are played right now across a lot of those platforms. And again, we talked about this earlier. We will not offer and we will not make available first-person shooter games. So, Overwatch is kind of a game that is allowed in some state associations, and a lot of other state associations say no because there are guns available in that, even though they're more in a character mode. So Overwatch is not one that we would offer. Call of Duty, there's a few of other ones that we wouldn't offer because of the gun aspect of it.
I have never felt older than I do right now.
Tony, I'm 36 years old. I kind of would.
Oh, I take that back. Now I do feel older.
I would credit myself as having some gaming experience from back in the day of college, but this world is completely foreign to me, and I have learned an incredible amount of information in gaming over the last 2.5 weeks as I've really dove into these companies. And even Mick is becoming a professional gamer.
When I put it out there with our activities coordinator, we got a group of kids that are really excited about the opportunity. So thank you. That was helpful.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Real quick, the last thing that I was going to throw out is there's also the CTE STEM kind of approach to this with esports as well. And looking at, and when we're talking to vendors, we're also looking at that aspect of how can we make this even bigger and provide opportunities for kids to look at a career in esports as far as, game development, working on the production side, the broadcast side of these things. So there's a little bit more of a bigger picture than just the esport level of it as well that we're also looking at.
Thank you, Justin. I'm gonna tag on to that real quick. For those of you, and I imagine many of you know this, but each of those CTE teachers you have in your building, they have to have a leadership component that's tied to their curriculum. So if you have a computer teacher, for example, that has a weak CTE club, right, something that isn't really thriving, if they ended up deciding that they wanted to make esports their CTE club tied to their particular computer course, there are certain elements to that. It actually helps them with their certification. It's something they have to do. It's then called a CTSO. So that's another way for you to be thinking about it in your own school too. And that would end up giving you some help that way.
And Megan put in the chat about the equity issue. So it's our understanding that most of the equipment that you would need, you would already have in a typical computer lab or CTE program. It would be, there's some specialty equipment for some of the more advanced gamers, similar to what you would find with different bats for softball or fast pitch or baseball, etc. But you should have most of the equipment readily available. And part of what Justin is leading for us is these platforms are very proprietary. And so we're trying to find one that offers the most widest game offerings. So sports specific and then also non-sports specific games, but also that will work with us on pricing. And currently, most of what we're looking at for potential costs is no more than $2,000 per school to participate, where some of them were 100 and some per student. There's also a number, that we're trying to hold to at $60 or less per student would be the school cost to access the platform and all that. So we're still in the midst of negotiating that with all these different groups. But the problem with them being proprietary, that is, if you sign up, and I know that a lot of you are getting hit up right now by various providers offering the 1-year deal and all these other things, they don't integrate. And so if you go with one, you'll be limited to whoever else is on that platform. And that's why we're trying to find one and use the state's ability to leverage pricing to provide something that you would be able, just like Justin said, compete against anybody you want in a non-league event or however we set up league. So that's the only caution is we're hearing some of those too good to be true deals being offered, and in some ways they really are good, and in some ways they're too good for what you might get stuck with long term if you sign for more than 1 year at a time. So.
Thank you. It was good.
All right. We're at 10:15. I got to imagine I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Got to imagine there's other meetings on the schedule for everybody today. But I would say, knowing that we had 140 that started out and we're still at 68 right now, a full hour after the meeting, that this may be the way we stay for the rest of the year. So next, because next Wednesday is actually—
Hey, Jeff, can I ask a mask question real quick?
A mask question?
Yeah. So Mick had mentioned in the regular meeting that if we wear masks, that we might be able to compete. I did a quick straw poll of all of my head coaches. Not surprisingly, every single one of them came back and said if that's what it takes in order to be able to compete, they would do that. What's the SMAC committee say on athletes wearing masks during competition? And we've always heard during the highly aerobic activity it's not recommended, but does the SMAC committee have any recommendations on that?
Thanks, Steve.
So we've been I haven't had the conversation with our entire SMAC committee. One of the doctors on there, Dr. Dresner, has been in touch with Mick and I quite a bit. And I asked that question, and really the kind of the answer that came back was that masks, it would be more about the acclimatization period with it. These sports can be participated in with masks on. We see other states that have done it in the fall, where volleyball was being contested. And now, granted, that's not wrestling and that's not running for cross country, but it is. They're moving it around quite a bit, and those have been mandated. And so, the short answer of it really is that there's not that big of an alarm about it. That he would support. That there would be support for that if that's what it took for us to get back into playing and participating in athletics. That's a road that we would go down, and we need to have a little bit more of a further conversation about it. But there was not an overarching concern from his end, and he works specifically with the heart and cardio through UW. So I trust what he's been telling us. And there's not a large concern for that. But yeah, that question was asked, Steve. So I appreciate that question being asked.
And I will tell you, in my last conversation on Friday with the Department of Health and the governor's office, they won't commit to anything, but they strongly suggested that the use of masks at all times would give a much greater opportunity for them to consider reclassifying risk levels. And so again, no commitment. They just asked me the question, how would we feel about it? And I said, well, we need to check with our doctors first and foremost, and then we also need to check with the membership to see where they would be at it. But I know in the Department of Health, the use of masks is their #1 priority as I'm talking to them. So I would say continue the conversations. We know Michigan is going to wrestle and play basketball with masks. So they're starting here, I think next week, maybe, with practices. And so we will continue to monitor that with Mark and the rest of them. And so if you have contacts in Michigan, we'd love to hear what the membership is saying out there about it as well.
All right, everybody. So just to close, next week, Veterans Day on Wednesday, the 11th. Please make sure if you know people that have served that you tell them thanks for what they've done for all of us. And then what I'll be doing with BJ is working to set this follow-up meeting for next week for Thursday morning rather than Wednesday morning. So next week, Thursday morning, every other time, we'll be doing it on the off Wednesdays. And next week, what we can do is we can circle back. We can circle back and look at rules again. We can circle back and look at the House Bill 1660 roundtable, and then any other talk that people have with ideas that may come up for other ways to potentially tackle this season, even at a local level. And hearing things from across the state, I would agree with a number of people who have said the more we end up talking to one another and the more we can end up sharing that we have spent time talking to others across the state, and we're vetting these ideas, I think the more credibility we have with our own people and the more chance